that's what I'm working on towards the 50% CD set. And then I'm not seeing any of the architect's drawings until they issue that 50% CD set. And I feel like my specs are not quite matching up because I didn't get to see anything since your 100% DD set. So I try to, make them aware of that and make sure we can close those gaps up. And, every once in a while reach out and be like, can I get an updated schedule? Or, make sure I've got the latest and greatest, or let me know if you changed something over here. Don't forget about me.
Yeah. It's like trying to move as fast as you can, but then also updating everybody because the engineers, the spec writer, all these other people aren't in these design meetings with the owner all the time. Yeah. And so it's like, I always try to educate to always do the things first that affect other people.
Yes.
And make sure you get it done and delegate, because then you're not holding anybody else back. Right. Take your own stuff and put it towards the end and make sure those people have something to do. Or I use that for them. If I need to delegate to them, I want to make sure I give them the list like end of day today, if it's a task for tomorrow, so they have it whenever they get in. But I tell them, like, if I email you at like 5, 6 o'clock, that does not mean do this right now unless it's a hot thing. And if it is, I'll probably just do it myself. But like, I'll send a list so you have a list for the next day or the morning, or send it Friday so they have it Monday.
Expectations and communication are huge in this industry. And I do feel like to me, as architects, our main job is to communicate. We are communicating the designer's own intent to the contractor via drawings and specs. And even though the specs are 50% of those contract document deliverables, we don't seem to spend 50% of our time or fee on them. But communicating to the team is such a big part of it. And my dad is an electrical engineer, so I grew up hearing him somewhat lament about last minute changes from the architect. And and I decided to go into architecture school, and I actually went to kind of a competing school in Oklahoma from where he went, but he still loves me anyway. But so we enjoy talking shop, but I definitely feel like I kind of almost had a little bit more of that in my mind all the time, where I'm like, I need to let my consultants know. That was always my, like, if the owner was making a change, that was always forefront in my mind, was like, okay, I got to get this out to my consultants right now.
Now, do you have like his sense of empathy now that you're on the consultant side and waiting for things from architects? You're like, I get it now.
I quickly I feel like I realized once I was on the architecture side, I was like, Dad, it's not really the architect making the last minute decision. It's the owner making the last minute decision, and it just flows down the pipeline. But I do feel like some architects are better than others about communicating those changes. And, very often it didn't seem like the owner really understood. We have to make a plan change. We have to send that plan change to MEP, all these other people. They have to change. Then we have to get it back from them. Then we have to incorporate, make sure registers are in the right place or other things, like it's not as quick of a turnaround as you think it is. And if you try to push it, you just don't get as much coordination. And that's where the holes end up, and you get RFIs and change orders and all those things that we try to avoid. So, and that kind of goes back to those expectations. And I do feel like architects aren't the best at being clear about those expectations to owners. As far as some of those things, like, certain changes just take time to do well and correctly and well coordinated. And it's for your benefit to give us an extra 3 days or something to just do this.
Yeah. Make sure it's done right.
Yes. Rather than pay double for it in construction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for professionals that are those project architects that are trying to do the drawings and the specs?
I would say if you can get your CDT, that is hugely helpful in just somewhat knowing kind of, it really does cover like those basic rules of how things work and kind of just the pieces of the puzzle that really need to be in place to be able to maintain your quality for your project, and to have a basic understanding of even what you're looking for during construction administration. you're comparing documents and submittals that they give you to what the specs say. And if you don't really know how to interpret what those specs say, how are you checking, how are you confirming that product actually meets the requirements? Because there's definitely a lot of things out there that are easy to, there's more than one underslab vapor barrier that's yellow, and you can mistake one for the other easily. And there's lawsuits about that all the time. But there's just a lot of nuanced things in there. And I had a rep who I knew through CSI, and she called me and was like, "Hey, this submittal got denied for Parix," and I went, "It's because." Your subcontractor sent us the wrong product in the submittal. What they sent us was like a trowelable thing, and that's not what we wanted." And she looked at what they sent and went, "Well, you're right. Yep." I try to educate them, and it's just like there's so many. It was I went through a project as well where there was kind of a lot of green staff on the construction management side, on the GC side, and they were sending us clear substitutions, not marking them as substitutions, just sending them through like a submittal. And, it was really starting, and particularly on something like the air barrier section, I had already provided 7 choices of like, these are ones that we have pre-vetted. We know we're good with these. You've got plenty to pick from, competition, and you're asking me for an 8th. And, it's just, a lot of those products are not apples to apples, and it can be very difficult to compare products if you don't know what you're looking at technically. So really, the more information you can find out about some of that stuff, I think the more beneficial it is to every architect's career. And it really is fascinating to me because, I have some clients who want to avoid certain companies due to
job site issues and
policy related things, even as far as what the company stands for. And yet in another one of their choices, it was, kind of picking a really over the top waterproofing that's urethane based, which is much worse for the environment than some of the other choices out there. And it's something that I just look at and think, gosh, it's like, it's so hard to focus. There's so many different things in architecture and pieces of the puzzle, and it's all moving parts that are constantly changing. And something that I actually tell people pretty often as well is, even if you think it probably changed. It probably changed since you learned it. It's you almost have to go into every project assuming nothing. You just have to somewhat, you do rely on those experiences and past to base things on, but you can't take everything at face value and think it's going to be exactly the same on the next job, because companies change all the time. Products are no longer available. It's a lot to keep up with. So, creating a network of people you can kind of use to try to help you keep up with some of that stuff is a big help as well.
Yeah, definitely. I know it's always hard just to keep up with, as I usually see a project all the way to the end. I'm not back in the design side for a while, and then it's like, okay, what's going on? Like, everything that was on the list before is now discontinued. Let's start over.
Yeah, totally. And my very first architecture job was for kind of not really a sole proprietor, because obviously he had people like me that did drafting and stuff. But he was kind of, his own little one-man shop and did a lot of things regionally. And I didn't learn much about codes there, because he would kind of just turn it in, and the city would say, "Oh, you need to read that corridor." But he taught me some really great things. Like he basically said, there's just no way you can know all this. So really, part of being a good architect is figuring out who you can contact, figure out the information you need, because it's a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Now moving on to you switching to being a full-time spec writer and stepping away from that architect role, what made that decision for you, or what were the stepping stones that you're like, I really like specs and I want to do that full-time?
I feel like was resistant to it. And when I was making a move from Oklahoma to Oregon, that was when I found out through a CSI friend that there was a position open at Master Spec. And, I basically just went for it and ended up, I think, getting my foot in the door partially because of my CSI certifications and having a friend there through CSI. So it was actually something I hadn't really thought about. I had been thinking about as I moved, like, would I want to be an independent consultant and just do specs on my own, be my own boss? And then I thought, gosh, that seems like I'm not the type of person that really wants to necessarily run my own business and do the invoicing side of it and all those other kind of admin things that come along with the business ownership side. So, and then of course, moving from Oklahoma to Oregon, I was also like, it seems a little bit of a big step to try to go out on my own when I'm also changing regions, going to somewhere where I really don't know anyone except for a couple of CSI friends that I've met at conferences before I moved here. But so that just didn't seem like the wisest of moves. And when the Master Spec opportunity opened up, I jumped on board and got it was very interesting to learn just about even styles of a Word document and how those control, that page format kind of stuff we talked about, and some of the things that I hadn't had as much time to dig into while I'm working on projects. And I really actually got to do some very focused research as I was updating sections there, and you'd really get to kind of dive into, a certain topic. So that was really, really cool. I really enjoyed being able to do the kind of the deep dive and really try to learn. Like I did some updates to the unit masonry section, and I got to, learn a whole lot about all the different organizations that are kind of around masonry and brick and things like that. And I cut that master section down from 72 pages to 66 pages. And I felt like that was a very big feat.
That was very big.
Streamline some things. But it was just interesting, even in that process. Like, I talked to one manufacturer, who said, you really don't need like the rubberized asphalt copper in there anymore, that flashing type. Nobody's really making it anymore. So just kind of being able to have some of that, it felt like more behind the scenes information about some products. And I was also in charge of some of the waterproofing sections. So I did some deep dives there, and I was amazed at how, I felt like I needed to call my friend from high school who's a chemistry teacher and ask her for a crash course, because it was, polyethyl, just, STPE, all the different chemistries and chemicals that go into the waterproofing and roofing membranes. And it was a lot. But it's very interesting to dig into some of that, and and then find even more of those little nuances, like even just the difference in things being called fiberglass or glass fiber. There's a difference. Just some of that stuff was very interesting. Some of those little tiny nuances, and being exposed to that whole process of how those documents are updated, and how the software works and all that. And then Conspectus, I did really want to keep doing specs, and Conspectus has a reputation that was just, they seemed like the gold standard of spec companies. And they just seemed like it was all these people who I'd heard of through CSI that are working together. And then I was like, oh, and they have their own software. That's just super cool. And I will say, I feel like I am now, like, I've had my first ever like proactive boss. I know it's really hard in business. You of course, bosses have to be proactive and have forethought and to stay in business. But I always felt like, especially at architecture firms, there's more reacting going on in management than thinking ahead. And it is hard to balance those two things and, keep everybody on track, but then moving forward somewhere where to be going, and not just kind of standing still and doing things the way you've always done them. I do think architecture in general, this industry gets really hung up on that. Contractors too, right? Like, they'll just add more costs to to a bid if it's something they're not as familiar with, sort of that unknown factor. And even that was something I kind of learned at the master spec portion of my career was, you know, how hard it is for like a new and innovative material to get to market. If you want a UL test, that's tens of thousands of dollars, right? Like, so to get listed and do all those tests that need to be done, you know, it's a long, arduous track. So it's really amazing how many pieces of the puzzle there are. And honestly, some days I'm amazed that buildings get built at all, right? I'm like...
Check out the full discussion from this bite of advice here. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on more mentorDINO content.